Today we're talking about 13 Reasons Why, one of the most controversial Netflix shows that received a lot of negative attention, and rightly so. And even though this show came out a long time ago, there is so much to say around its impact on culture and the media and the general reception to it.
What the fuck? What the actual fuck are you thinking?
Clay, would you take a seat in my office, please?
No, I will not take a seat in your office.
The show follows Clay, a teenage boy who struggles to wrap his mind around the death of his friend Hannah and these tapes that she leaves behind after her death, explaining the 13 reasons that led up to it. Jaden Ep Cohen from Florida International University said that when Netflix's hit show first aired, it was initially hailed as one of the first mainstream shows to portray issues of teenage mental illness. It was congratulated for breaking the stigma surrounding mental illness and suicide and thrusting such issues into the limelight. Yet, to many, it became clear over the course of the award-winning TV show's 4 seasons that the series was doing little to aid or inform its audiences about mental illnesses, and was in fact a detriment to eliminating the stigma surrounding mental health. Real mental illness is neither suitable for nor attractive in Hollywood television. Thus, the characters and their struggles were exaggerated, romanticized, or otherwise misconstrued to be more entertaining to the show's audience, at the cost of leaving behind most of the show's marketed advocate work about mental illness. So you may find this familiar because I have talked about this on my YouTube channel before. I made a big deep dive into the show, like a 40-minute one. It got quite a lot of views actually. And then I took it down due to some copyright monetization issues. I'm actually glad now I think about it that I did have the opportunity to refilm this video, because there were quite a few people that I really felt misunderstood the intent of that video, or just basically didn't quite get it, or they just didn't, like, because of a point I made, people misunderstood it and took it to mean something else. So it's actually nice that I have an opportunity to make it very clear what I was saying, because one of the things I criticized a lot about the show in that video was how it just doesn't make sense. It's got lazy writing, and I didn't appreciate the way that it framed the build up to Hannah's suicide and her kind of building sense of depression and stress, which led to her ending her own life. And there will be a lot of sensitive topics discussed in this video in case you didn't already know. So if any of these things are not good, this is a content warning right now. You do not need to watch this video. If it is going to be harmful to you in any way or not good vibes, then that's fine. You can skip this one if you need to. But I have no issue, obviously, with describing a character who has a mental illness or who has depression or who ends their own life. Sometimes we need to create a dialogue around these things anyway, and a discussion. But it was the way that the show did it which came across as very confusing or lazy, or like they didn't really understand anything about ending your own life. Like they truly were confused themselves or hadn't really put research into it. That's very much how it came across, and that was one of my biggest issues, was how we're meant to sympathize for Hannah and get some insight into her mind, and instead it paints the whole lead up as weird, confusing, and also frankly makes her out to be this really like petty person. Like her rationale, it's like I can't get in her headspace. I'm sorry. Like it's so melodramatic, and not in a good way, just in a messy way. Because of the way that she describes, these are the 13 reasons why I ended my own life. You know, this person did this to me, this person did this to me, this person did this to me, and it led to this accumulation, this snowball effect of me getting increasingly depressed, and I did it. And she lists so many different people, some of which rank in levels of seriousness. Some of them are very, very serious things that happened to her, and others are more kind of general stuff, like these 2 people not being good friends to her. But the show presents it as if each of these things are of equal weight, and each of these people should feel equally responsible for doing these horrible things to Hannah, even though the range of like the extremities of their crimes is like so, like there's no nuance here though. They're all given the same weight as if they're all worth the same. And that's where my issue comes in, because it implies that these people should somehow feel responsible for her, when some of them literally barely did anything wrong, or it's nothing where that kind of responsibility or blame should be pinned on them. But Hannah's acting like, oh my gosh, this guy didn't want to go out. Oh, I'm gonna end my own life. And when I said that in the video, that's where a lot of people got upset because they were saying that I was like basically trivializing mental illness, or that I was saying you need a logical reason to commit suicide. I want to clear this up right now for anyone that did misunderstand that. I'm not saying that at all. We as humans are inherently, we're not driven by like logic and rationale, even if we pretend we are. We're driven by emotion and what feels comfortable and seeking pleasure or avoiding pain. It's very primitive. We are, of course, emotional creatures driven by emotion, and that's okay. That's what makes us human, and that's beautiful. And you don't need a rational reason to end your own life or to be depressed that makes sense to everyone. And I understand that. I'm not saying that Hannah needed to justify why, that her character needed to have this completely logical thing, because these things are not logical. So I understand that. And especially like as a teenager, these things that she's describing, like feeling socially isolated, or this boy not liking her back, or this boy not treating her well, especially when you're a teenager, you are very emotional, and these things feel like such a big deal at the time. They're magnified times 100, and little things become big things, and it feels like a really huge deal even if no one else gets it, because you are kind of melodramatic. And sometimes what makes you really low is an accumulation of seemingly small, meaningless things, but they bug you, and one by one they pick away at your self-esteem, and it kind of builds up and it accumulates. And yes, this happens. There's no point in trying to invalidate people and their experiences, because everyone's experience is valid. And if Hannah felt like that guy had really like bothered her and it had gotten her head and it affected her self-esteem and made her feel down, then who are we to tell her that she's wrong? That's fine. My issue was how the show wrote it in a way that didn't really get that message across and didn't really explain the nuance of it. And so it came across as petty and melodramatic rather than kind of just giving us an insight into her mind. The show frames Hannah's demise in a confusing, unclear way, or like she's kind of pointing blame at people, as if the reason why people end their own life is because other people had something to do with it and other people led to it and they're to blame, and it's about others as opposed to your own internal state. It's really simplifying her actions as the consequences of these 13 people, and actually it's way more complicated than that. And this is one of many, many things which kind of leads to the oversimplification or even romanticization of Hannah ending her own life. And that's what I want to discuss in this video, is the overall romanticization or mislabeling of mental health and mental illness in this show, and why they kind of messed up and it was harmful. The show unintentionally so makes Hannah appear like the biggest villain of the show, as she's there rather than just being low and being sad, she's there planning, recording these tapes and sending them out to people after her demise in this very bizarre, premeditated way. I'm not sure if I would go so far as to say it's a suicide revenge fantasy, but it's definitely bordering on it because of I don't know anyone that's done this. It's crazily planned, and she's thinking more about these other people and what they did to her and telling them why she's doing what she's about to do. Like, okay, a guy in your class objectified you and he said that you had a great butt and it was gross and it made you feel just really uncomfortable. Of course, that's terrible, but like, it's so weird that rather than her feeling low, she's there kind of narrating all these events so people can know what he did, and it didn't land. Whatever they were going for, whatever effect they were trying to achieve, wasn't communicated the best. Like, she's throwing in, oh yeah, Bryce literally RAP'd me, like he did that to me. Oh, but that's in the same category as this other girl not being a good friend to me, and Clay actually, he didn't cause it, but you know, he did kind of invalidate me, and like, she just throws in all these random things, and then something really, really serious, and then this other more normal teenage stuff. And there were people mentioned on the tapes that did mean well by her, that weren't trying to ruin her life like Zach, and they weren't like these mastermind villains. But imagine the guilt and the trauma and the PTSD that these people will be left with for even being included in these tapes, or thinking that even in a small way that they somehow led to her death. Imagine for Clay this extreme anxiety, and I mean, we saw the effect on him of him basically thinking he's involved, and so he has to sit through minutes and minutes and hours of these tapes, listening, waiting for her to explain what he did to her, because he doesn't think he did anything, and he's there thinking that somehow he's responsible, and eventually he finds out that she doesn't blame him. But how is he supposed to know that? So he's there waiting for the verdict, like, oh my gosh, what did I do? I didn't do anything. Like, in that case, why didn't she just mention and address him first so he would know that he didn't like do anything, just put him out of his misery already. When she got mad at Clay for leaving, but she was also telling him to leave and getting mad at him for staying and yelling at him, telling him to get out. So what was he supposed to do? And it's not just Hannah's character where it's a bit illogical. The issue comes in with Clay as well. At first, I loved him in season 1 because he just seemed like a very sweet, well-meaning boy who was going through it and had some anger over these events and just wanted a sense of closure and understanding. After her death, he struggles with extreme survivor's guilt. But he is one of the most criticized characters on the show due to what many describe as a hero complex, or what I think it's more like white knight syndrome, like she's the damsel in distress and I need to come and save her and I'm responsible for her mental well-being and I can fix her. Or even some codependency. And it makes it seem like Hannah's negative spiral and her mystery and allure is all tied into the fact that she was depressed, and it makes her almost more like appealing to Clay because then he's regretting what he did and wishing that he could have been there for her in life. And at points I really actually shipped them as a couple, but that's kind of part of the romanticization of it as like this tragic love story. And as the show goes on, this whole thing of Clay trying to be everyone's hero becomes quite annoying actually, and almost him being a bit judgmental of other people and holding them to a very high bar. But he's actually struggling. Like, I'm judging him, but he was legitimately struggling and needed serious help, and that wasn't being addressed fully. He's hallucinating Hannah after her death as if she's there in the room with him and becoming increasingly angry or not treating his parents well. He yells at a police station that he has a gun and he held a gun in the air at school. Like, he's behaving unhinged. Like, that's not normal. He nearly got himself killed when he tried to confront Tyler and stop him from shooting up the school. Now, of course, that was brave, and I'm glad that he helped and that he spoke some sense into Tyler, but that's not the point. When someone's there about to commit a shooting, you don't go and like approach them and try and reason with them, like, unless you don't value your own life whatsoever. But that was a huge risk he took. He's just lucky that it paid off. Normally it wouldn't. And then he's basically covering up what Tyler was going to do, which is also not okay, because that sort of thing should be reported, as Tyler was both a danger to himself and to society, and he wasn't really someone predictable or controllable. You didn't know what he was going to do next. And they're always talking about drunk driving in the first season and how it's really bad and a really big deal, but that's literally something that Clay himself does in season 4, and he like crashes Zach's car and leaves Zach there, just leaves him to die. And this is a lot of things I've described now that are not okay that Clay does, but that he's never really forced to take responsibility for. He just gets away with it. There's this whole arc of him going crazy and like not remembering things properly and having like doing things and not realizing that he's doing them, like being the villain and not knowing it and then not realizing he's doing it. And that's not normal. Again, that's actually really worrying. This is not okay. It's a legitimate psychotic episode, as we find out later, but it's not something that's properly like dived into and that he gets help for, that's explained in a way that is reassuring for us as an audience. And in general, this is, I think, a bigger issue in the show as a whole, which is that the writing is inherently lazy and confusing. It doesn't make sense. You don't get it. And not just with Clay, with all of them. For instance, Hannah, she knew that Bryce was extremely dangerous, yet she goes to his party that she knows he'll be at. And she gets in the hot tub, she knows he's there, and everyone's leaving, and she's taking way too long to leave, even though she knows that she'll be left alone with him. Knowing how dangerous he is, it's odd that she wasn't making it an absolute priority to stay away from him at the party. Like, I'm talking 10-foot barge pole. I'm not blaming what happened to her. He is fully responsible for his actions and what he did to her. That's not her fault. However, it just doesn't make sense to me that she would sit there just being like, oh, everyone's leaving. Okay, another person's left. I'm in the hot tub. It's literally just going to be me and him, and I'll just wait, and I'll wait for something to happen. Like, when she fully knew what he was capable of. It is a very, very overly dramatic show, which contributes to this sense of, rather than them painting real events, kind of just amping it up for the drama, for the cash, and to keep viewers interested. Like, for instance, even that guy who wanted Clay to listen to the tapes, Tony, it was really important to him that Clay heard the tapes, and so he was very melodramatically appearing out of nowhere in random situations just to egg Clay on and tell him off for not listening to the tapes.
Listen to the tapes, Clay. You have to listen. Clay, you're the slowest yet. You have to listen.
I don't know a single teenager that would respond in that way, and he kept coming across as like a 30-year-old man. It was so hard for me to mentally get that he was so young, because he didn't behave that way. But even more worryingly, it shows the pretty explicit graphic scene of Hannah ending her own life in the bath, which no one needed to see that. Normally it's advised to not actually show that stuff. Like, it's okay to show the aftermath or maybe someone rushing in and finding them, but like showing the whole process seemed very, very overkill, no matter how well acted it was. And the fact that a show like this, which is so dark, is so easily available and accessible is worrying to me. I don't care if they give a disclaimer at the beginning. It's just there on Netflix for people to see, even people who are very easily influenced or maybe are in a bad place themselves. Jaden Ep Cohen also said that one of the most common and harmful stereotypes employed in media, which use mental health as a plot device, is that mental health professionals are depicted as being ineffective, inaccessible, or simply moronic. This useless shrink trope is commonly employed to facilitate the portrayal of mental illness as a plot point or source of conflict. If the character's problems were easily helped by visiting one, there would not be a story. 13 Reasons Why also depicts mental illness as a commonality, and yet each of its characters deem mental health resources ineffective. This common stereotype is dangerous, as it can rhetorically influence the audience into conflating real mental health workers with fictitious ones, believing they too would be useless, and so lead vulnerable patients to isolate themselves from any psychological aid. It also serves to undercut the damage control efforts of mental health professionals after this show's release. Over the course of 13 Reasons Why, this stereotype is employed prodigiously, such as when the school's counselor is shown as ineffective and clueless when Hannah brings her sexual assault to his attention. Other characters throughout the 4 seasons often face negative backlash from trying to reach mental health professionals, and so spend much of their time concealing the extent of their struggles from the proper authorities, such as when one student, Tyler, attempts a school shooting after being brutally assaulted by other classmates in the bathroom. His friends take every precaution to stop him and subsequently proceed to cover for him from the authorities. For viewers, this sends a very dangerous message. No matter how well versed in the subject, authority is not to be trusted. The danger of this trope, especially in the context of a show such as 13 Reasons Why, cannot be overstated, as it portrays that mental health professionals and authority figures are ineffective and useless, turning the audience away from potentially seeking aid for their own struggles and trauma. And I agree. And it makes it even worse when we as the audience are encouraged to feel like Hannah's somewhat still there, because she's reappearing in flashbacks in like the 2nd season and later in the show, when we know that she should be dead. But it creates this illusion that maybe she's still alive, and that doesn't really highlight the seriousness and permanence of suicide. They go on, equally harmful is the portrayal of Hannah's tapes as a means of revenge. Suicide revenge fantasy is a psychiatric phenomenon where patients believe that ending their lives is worth it for the negative feelings it will bring to others. Despite having lost her life, through her tapes, Hannah Baker is shown to have succeeded in her revenge goals. All of the other characters are distraught and feeling guilty about her death, and through that her own life became important and memorialized. Effectively, her character is communicating that after death, another dangerous suicide fantasy is happening, and it implies that suicide is a means to change others and what they think of you. The portrayal of Hannah's suicide as a revenge fantasy and her tapes as a way of gaining agency from beyond the grave is, according to most experts, damaging and entirely detached from reality. Moving towards promotional material, it is clear from 13 Reasons Why's first advertisement campaigns how much the mischaracterization of the mentally ill is an intended effect of the advertisement's rhetorical appeals. One of the first promotional campaigns for the show involved a series of posters composed of portrait views of the main characters, upon which is imposed some quote from or about the show. These are typically vindictive messages such as, "You know what you did, don't you?" or "How do you live with yourself?" All but 2 of these quotes follow this format directed by the "you" pronoun towards the character in the portrait. Using pathos, this aligns the audience with the outrage of the speaker towards that character. Given these quotes are always spoken either to or about the suicide victim Hannah, this reinforces the post-mortem revenge fantasy that Netflix has cultivated. As this marketing aligns us with Hannah Baker, it paints her as being vengeful and manipulative, blaming others entirely for what has befallen her, all from before the very first episode aired. And honestly, I think this person has got a point. That's why I included it in the video, because no matter what way you look at it, it is generally melodramatic and harmful. And it's not just the mental health thing, it's other sensitive or dark topics in general not being treated with the delicacy and care that they deserve, because these are very sensitive topics. They need to be handled with care, and this show continued to mishandle them. It has very graphic depictions of SA, including with what happens to Tyler in the bathroom, which is this very disturbing, weirdly and unnecessarily prolonged scene. Like, we get it, we know what happened to him in the bathroom, we know it was bad, it didn't need to go on for that long. And the show has some redeemable qualities for sure, showing the decline of Hannah's mental health, but it's like as the show went on, it got increasingly worse. Season 1 definitely has its really great moments that I enjoyed, and that was entertaining, I guess, or interesting or thought-provoking, but it's like as the show went on, it got increasingly unhinged and just messy and lazy. We get an unnecessary amount of focus in like season 3 and 4 on Bryce, the rapist, and his kind of journey and thought process, as if we care. Like, I'm all for giving villains some multi-dimensionality and some backstory, but like that was just ridiculous. Like, no one cares. We don't need that. We don't need to hear that. I'm not interested. I know that people aren't black and white. Yeah, I get that on a logical level, but sometimes it's good to just leave things where they are. And Arnie is this other character who's introduced later as a very focal point of the show that, again, didn't need to be there. Like, no one wanted that. It was just unnecessary, and she brought nothing.
It's my two favorite sad, skinny guys.
It's too soon to joke.
Oh, I love you, and you know it. And you two working out together.
Please don't say we're
are
cute.
so fucking hot. I can't even stand it. I'm overwhelmed.
She's infuriating because she thinks that she's so smart and that everything she has to say is something of great value, but she feels like a piece of fan fiction, or this character that self-inserts herself into everything. It's actually, I'm serious now because it annoys me, but it's actually the funniest thing ever if you go on YouTube and you just look up Arnie and you watch compilations of her scenes, because you realize how terribly her dialogue is written, first of all, but also how funny it is, because she keeps just popping up in random situations, just making her piece of wisdom known as if it's important or as if she has something to offer. She just kind of cruises in like, oh, I have this to offer, like I'm so great, and you're like, no one cares. And also, she doesn't know these people. She's very new at the school. She just arrives one day. We get no insight on her context or her backstory. She just appears. And so it's really odd that everyone's filling her in on the goss and all their really dark secrets, when frankly it's none of her business. And also, they don't really know if they can trust her because she's new there. But she's like this amateur wannabe detective, inserting herself into everything, giving advice, trying to understand the meaning of things and get to the bottom of everything. And it's just incredibly cringy and so funny, because honestly, girl, sit down. You don't know what you're dealing with here. You're too new. You weren't there long enough. You have no idea what you're walking into. It was also very worrying to me that she chose to get involved with Bryce, knowing what awful things people had said about him and these stories that she'd heard of him. And she's very often kind of putting herself up here in this moral high ground, or especially with Clay. And it's like, but girl, what are you doing? This sense of self-importance that she has is what makes her more aggravating. And I guess it would be okay if she only appeared occasionally, but considering that she has so much screen time, it just makes it extra annoying. And you could argue that Alex as well is an equally messy character who was all over the place, although I would argue that Arnie is pretty bad, but that's what I mean in general. The laziness of this show comes in, and so sometimes they do really, really impactful stuff that works or makes a statement about like the fragility of youth, or some sort of really interesting commentary actually, but then when they do something good, it's undermined by the other bad stuff, so you don't really get a chance to kind of see. And I'm aware, like, I like talking about these bad shows because I genuinely find it funny and I find it entertaining, but I know a lot of people will be like, wow, like this is such a negative review or something, or you're just nitpicking the bad stuff. But I'm really not. I just don't see the appeal of the show or how it actually has anything positive to contribute. I'm just like, yeah, I'm not feeling it, sorry. Like, I'm just getting bad vibes the whole way through, just bad vibe after bad vibe. Sorry, but I'm just being honest here. Like, that is the way it is. And I know this as well, that it's not just me, because if you look on YouTube or you look up articles or just people talking about it, there was so much negative criticism and a lot of people saying that people were actually more harmed by the show than it did them any kind of service, that it just made things worse. And I know that media is just media and you can't use a piece of media to like blame what happens to someone in real life, but media still needs to be somewhat sensitive towards how it's shaping us, because you know, it is absorbed by our mind and we do process or internalize some of the things that we consume at the very least. So it is important, obviously, to be considerate of what you're consuming. They made it come across as kind of melodrama as opposed to really like doing anything or addressing anything, and they know how juicy it sounds, calling it like 13 Reasons Why and making it all like mysterious, so you want to watch it. But that's actually part of the problem, is how they're monetizing something that is actually very serious, and it's not like a fun juicy joke like a love triangle or something where you can just milk it for all it's worth, because it has a bigger impact than that. And sure, it's not as bad as some shows on Netflix that I've seen, but it's also not one of the best either, because it says so much while saying nothing at all, and throwing in like really serious things in a way that just feels like, oh look, drama, everyone check this out, rather than actually putting it in with some kind of like critique or intent to like reflect or something. It's just like boom, drama. So let me know what you guys think in the comments, and if you want to see more from me, you can sign up for my Patreon for as little as $2 a month to see extra juicy stuff from me, extra content, makeup for YouTube videos, all that jazz. And I hope you're all enjoying this amazing, festive, fun Christmas period, as am I. I'm just loving all the Christmas vibes at the moment. I think it's absolutely wonderful and fabulous, and it's just my favorite time of year. I will see you for the next one. Mwah.